Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Up Close on METV. I'm Charles Clapsaddle, Station Manager for Manatee Educational Television. It's our great pleasure to have with us today Congressman Vern Buchannan. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us, sir, and I appreciate you taking the time to give us this legislative update.
I appreciate the opportunity, Charles, and I enjoy this. I guess we do it once every couple of months, and I always enjoy the opportunity.
Well, it's certainly been a busy time since last we saw you. There's certainly been a lot of domestic and international things that you're going to give us some insight on. But one of the great things that that we'd like to comment on is the fact that you're always available to give updates, which I think is a great thing. You're always out there in the community trying to, answer questions and give that information which the community needs.
Well, I appreciate it. I always tell people I'm humbled to be a congressman, but at the end of the day, I'm a representative. It's about representing the people, and the more I can get out there and listen to what their thoughts and ideas, it makes me more effective, ideally in Washington.
Now, Congressman, one of the key things that you actually have been involved in as a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, you just held a hearing recently with the head administrator for Medicaid and Medicare and talking about the rollout of Obamacare. Can you give us your thoughts on this and some of the reactions that you felt that you received?
Yeah, as on the committee, the person, the head administrator, oversees the website. She's also over Medicare and Medicaid. Mm-hmm. So we had the opportunity to question her the other day. And just in front of me, someone had asked her, this was about 2 weeks after the website had been launched, mm-hmm. that she thought everything was going fine. And at that point, I changed my question and I said, I can't imagine how you can think things are going fine. It's been a national disaster from a public relations standpoint, mm-hmm. and people need to be held accountable. I think at some point they'll get the website fixed, ideally sooner than later, mm-hmm. but I am very concerned about Obamacare and the overall cost of health care. In terms of our country, it seems like it's doubled in the last 4, 5, or 6 years. And I've done a lot of town halls, as you know, Charles, right. Even in Bradenton here, one lately, where a woman was mentioning that her cost for health care for her and her family to get a decent policy, not a great policy, but a good policy, almost $2,000 a month. That's outrageous. Mm.
Well, what were some of the responses that you received? Do you think that they're on the road to kind of improve or correct some of the deficiencies that were pretty evident from the very beginning?
Yeah, the big thing is it's not going to bend the cost on health care, and that's my concern. You can't have a family of 4, whether the small business is paying 75% or 50%, costing $1,500 a month. That's my biggest concern about Obamacare, is that I don't see it bending the curve. The other thought is that there's 300,000 people, I think last week, I think it's probably over 500,000 when you look at all the various providers, that got their insurance canceled. And these are people that are small business people, professionals, lawyers, attorneys, but a lot of different small business people that got canceled don't have a source. They're hoping that the Obamacare site will come up at some point, but it's very concerning to them. And the initial stories I'm hearing is that many times their insurance is doubling, which is really troubling to all of us.
And that's something that, obviously in the months ahead we can follow up on and talk about. But one of the key things that's happened since the last time you were available is that we had a partial government shutdown. But after that shutdown was for a period of time, you, as a Republican, voted to end that shutdown. And can you tell us your thoughts on that and why you reacted so much?
Well, I think it was not just the government shutdown, which was terrible. I think we need to find a way to work together. That's the problem, is Washington's broken. But the bigger issue even than that was important, but the big issue is that they were talking about not paying the bills. It'll be the first time in the history of the country we haven't paid our bills if we didn't raise the debt ceiling. And I was very concerned about where that was going, because as someone that's been in business 30 years, I'm not a career politician, been on bank boards, I know what happens happens when individuals and small business or big businesses get in a point where they can't pay their bills. It's horrible on your reputation. All of a sudden you can't get credit at the same pricing. I mean, if we raised our cost of money just 1%, would be another $170 billion a year. So I just was not, that was something that it was just not the right thing to do. There's no way that I was going to vote to not pay our bills and affect not just America, but I think it would affect the world.
And you know, I think everybody was resting a little easier after that budget was passed. But there's still work to be done, and that is the Budget Conference Committee that is meeting. Can you tell us your thoughts on that, and what do you think the outcome will be?
Well, I want to be hopeful in this, and so we'll see, but the Democrats and Republicans are working together. Paul Ryan, I've talked to him and others on the committee. I'd like to see us move towards a constitutional balanced budget amendment. When I first got elected to Congress 6-7 years ago, that was the first bill I introduced. I reintroduced it each Congress. We have had one vote on it, but just simply says you don't spend more than you take in. Right. We've been running the last 5 years on average over $1 trillion each year in deficits, but you look at the state of Florida, they have to balance their budget because, like 49 out of 50 governors, they have a constitutional balanced budget amendment. That's what I'm pushing. That's what I'd like to see. We can't do it tomorrow. However, the $1.3 trillion deficits we've been running, it'll be in about half this year, so we've made some progress. Right. But we need to also find a way where we just simply, from a common sense standpoint, we don't continue to spend more than we take in, because we're going to leave our children and grandchildren a country that'll be more like Greece going forward if we don't deal with that today. So that's why this is so important, that conference in terms of budgeting.
Well, one of the things that you brought up is the sense of transparency and the importance of having those meetings held in public and televised. Why did you think that was important to do?
Well, it's something that I've put out there fairly aggressively in the last couple of weeks. I'd like to see it held in public. We're considered the Sunshine State. I think it's important for the American people, to understand exactly how serious our spending addiction is. And when you're spending $1 trillion more than you take in, at some point, like I said, you end up in a bad situation, bankruptcy or ideally worse, if we can continue to go down this path. Right. And I think it would be a great education. A lot of people understand it, but there's a lot more people that need to understand it, because America is a very special place. And I think a lot of people feel that way, but we're putting it more at risk every day, where we continue to spend trillions of dollars that we don't have every year. We're going to pass that on to our kids and grandkids. They'll never be able to pay it. Right. And I think it's immoral what's happening, frankly, in terms of Washington, as we pile up this debt and deficit. And this year, by the way, Charles, we're going to have record tax receipts, more than we've ever taken in, but yet we'll still overspend the budget $600 to $700 billion, which, like I said earlier, I think is immoral.
Well, Congressman, we all seem to be in a budget crisis. There's always seems to be, if it's not this year, it's next year or the previous year. There's always seems to be this budget crisis that looms over, the United States. Why do you think that is? And why do you think there is, there's not a meeting of the minds, to try to solve that?
Well, because again, it gets back to Washington's broken. It's not just Democrats, it's Democrats and Republicans both. If you look over the last 50 years, we balanced the budget 5 times, 45 times we haven't balanced it. It's just we've got used to this addiction of spending. It's not about more taxes, because they have had tax increases. They're going to have record revenue in terms of the Treasury this year. This is about we've got away with it. We have a credit card that we can run it up on. We can just finance our deficits through the Chinese and Japanese, so we still have the best economy in the world, and people are willing to buy the debt. But at some point, they don't buy it, it ends badly. And I just think we need to start turning that ship around now in terms of moving forward. But, there's no other institution, small families, if you look at Manatee or City of Bradenton or any of these communities, you can't continue to spend more than you take in. And that's the problem we've got. That's become a way of life in Washington. Right. A lot of people see that, and that's why there's so much anger about what's taking place in Washington. That's why we've got to find a way to come together, deal with the big issues in terms of the entitlement programs. That's the biggest thing, and start moving towards a balanced budget amendment in the near future.
Do you feel optimistic about that?
I'd like to. That's my biggest focus. I mean, we have a lot of issues we'll talk about today and other issues, but the biggest issue to me by far is our deficit spending And I tell people in 2007, when I came there, it was $8 trillion and change. Today it's almost $17 trillion. If you look at it closely, we'll be at $20 trillion. Cost of money normally 4 or 5%. You're looking at $1 trillion in interest. Before you pay out $1 to veterans, to Medicare, Social Security, and that's troublesome. And I just think that we've got to deal with that aggressively now, or it's going to really put us in a bad situation the next 3 to 7 years, I think.
Well, one of the things, aside from these big items, these national items of the budget, you've always had, an abiding interest in the local issues, how it concerns your constituents in this area. And one of those key issues, of course, is the flood insurance rates that have been skyrocketing. That impacts homeowners, governments, businesses. First of all, can you explain why and how these flood insurance rates have skyrocketed, and what are we going to be doing about that?
Well, let me just say this Friday, you mentioned reaching out to the community. We are going to be doing something near the airport. They can call our Bradenton office and get the information. We're going to be talking about flood insurance. We're going to have real estate people, residents. It's open to the public. So I just encourage any of your viewers to come out and talk about that. But the bottom line is, when we get these big storms like Katrina and Sandy in New York, and you're writing checks hundreds of billions of dollars, it puts the whole fund at risk, and that's what's happened. I think they've got a $25 billion deficit, so all of a sudden they've got to raise the rates. What we're trying to do by legislation is to slow that process down a year or two, and then come up with something that makes sense long term, because you're hearing stories. It's not just people on the beach, it's in terms of the Bay Area, any of those properties, and then there's other properties that might be completely off the water but in a flood zone. You're hearing that it's going up as much as 500%. So someone's paying a couple $1,000s a year and it goes to $10,000. People can't afford it. It makes no sense. So we're trying to slow that process down on a bipartisan basis, and see if we can't do something that makes sense. And then I'm also, as you know, Charles, chairman of the Florida delegation. We have the third largest delegation in the country. We're going to be doing something the next couple of weeks with members on both sides of the aisle, and we're 100% on this. We want to try to find something, we slow this process down in terms of those increases, and then with the idea that we can take a look at it and come up with a plan going forward that makes sense, replenish the fund, but at the same time not bankrupt people or have people thrown out of their homes because they can't afford the insurance.
And for the state of Florida, it's a really hot topic item, because throughout the state people are saying, how can we afford this?
Yeah, we're the epic center. But I tell people that when we were at the meeting last week, there was people from Mississippi and Louisiana and from Colorado. You wouldn't think of Colorado, but they have a lot of flooding. Or along the Mississippi, there's a lot of flooding. So there's a lot of people impacted by this, by flood insurance, and we need to make sure that we get this fixed properly. And we hope to get something addressed the next couple of months.
And your meeting with your town hall meeting about flood insurance will be this Friday at the Dan McClure Auditorium, which is by the airport, and that starts at what time, sir?
I think it's 11 o'clock. I'd have to check, but I think it's around 11 o'clock.
But they can contact your office for more information.
Contact our Bradenton office and they can get the information, but we would really like to have as many viewers as they can come out, and we'd like to hear their thoughts and ideas on it as well.
And one of the things that, another item that, one local issue that we want to bring up, or national issue as well, has been prescription drug abuse. And you've been kind of in the forefront of bringing this to a national attention. Now, the FDA has announced that they're recommending tighter controls on a lot of addictive and deadly painkillers, rescheduling hydrocodone from a Schedule 3 to a Schedule 2. And that almost mirrors the legislation that you have introduced. What does that mean, and why is that so important, and important for the state of Florida, but nationally as well?
Yeah, I'm very excited about it, but what it means much more than even myself is I had 3 or 4 mothers that have come in, and fathers and others that have lost their sons or daughters A grandfather in the area came home, found his daughter dead, granddaughter dead. And it's just a national disaster in Florida. We're losing 7 people a day to prescription drug abuse and addiction. So by rescheduling these drugs, basically what we're doing is making it tougher. They've got to come in and go actually see the doctor every 90 days instead of having a prescription refilled. And there's a lot of addiction. That someone said the other day there's more people killed from prescription drug abuse than car accidents. And at one point when we got involved in this with these parents that brought it to my attention, it wasn't on my radar screen, we had more pill mills in the state of Florida than McDonald's. So we've made a lot of progress. I'm very excited about the FDA taking our thoughts and our ideas in terms of moving this forward, but we still have a lot more work to do. There's still too many kids that are dying as a result of this. But I feel very fortunate that we've got done. It's been a team effort, though.
And you really have to take hats off to the state legislature as well, as that the Attorney General kind of tried to do her best to do away with the pill mills and doctor shopping, but still there's a lot to be done to kind of combat this addictive pain pill misuse. Yeah,
well, the Attorney General's Pam Bondi's done an incredible job. The governor's come along and moved in that direction in terms of drug database, and I had many members of Congress coming from Kentucky and Tennessee and other states, and they were saying, hey, our kids are dying because it's so easy to get drugs down there. They're flying here, taking the vans down. They go in these pill mills, get a prescription on like McDonald's on one side and go fill their order in the same facility on the next side. And it's a big problem. Then they would buy a pill for $1 and sell it for $10. Meanwhile, a lot of kids and people are dying as a result of it.
Well, I'd like to follow up on this, future programs, because this is something that's very important for the state of Florida and for this area as well. But Congressman, I want to take a few minutes. We've always kind of stayed and focus on those issues that are most critical to your constituents, which are domestic issues and jobs and employment and economic stimulus. But we're going to take a few minutes now, if we may, because as a member of Congress, you help mold foreign affairs. And we want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on internationally and those things that are kind of critical to the safety and security of the United States. And one of the most hot topic items that's been the thing has been Syria. It's really dominated international affairs for months now. What started off as the civil war has now escalated. Now the president at one time proposed U.S. military action against Syria for the use of chemical weapons. You opposed that, and can you give us your thoughts on that and where are we going now?
Well, I think they were looking at military action. There's no question they were going down that road, and I think they were close to making that decision. But I think he'd asked Congress to weigh in. I felt strongly we can't be the world's policeman. It is very fragile in the Middle East. If we engage, you never know where that might end up, because Israel's a great friend, and we have a lot of some other friends in the region. If they get brought into this, then we get brought in more. And I think people are just fatigued in terms of Iraq and Afghanistan, and then have another gigantic issue, put our kids and our fortune at risk. I just wasn't willing to go there. I'm all about diplomatic relations, anything we can do from a diplomatic standpoint there, but I just wasn't willing to commit troops there, and I think that's as a result of that. I think Congress weighed in fairly aggressively. I think I provided some leadership on that, but at the end of the day, it wasn't the right decision for the U.S.
Now, the UN has a resolution that's calling for the destruction of all of Syria's chemical weapons things. What's your position on that?
Well, again, I'd like to do anything we can to remove chemical weapons from Syria or anywhere else in the world, and I support that. But at the same time, it's not just about Syria, it's about the whole Middle East. And I can tell you, I've been to Cairo and other parts of in Israel. It's very fragile there, and probably more so than it's ever been. So we've got to keep our eye on it. We're going to be engaged. We're going to make sure we support our friends there. But at the same token, it's a very fragile situation.
Well, many people feel that the greatest threat right now throughout the whole Middle East is Iran. Now, the president recently had a historic phone call with the new Iranian president. What's your position on diplomacy with Iran and sanctions as well as they kind of move forward?
I think we've got to be very careful and thoughtful about dealing with Iran. I'm for sanctions as aggressively as we can in terms of Iran, but when they call for the annihilation of Israel, which has been a great friend of ours, I'm not willing to go there. I've been very supportive of Israel, and so I think we've got to tread very carefully with Iran. I don't think they have any credibility with the American people.
Well, during your first term, you traveled to Israel, and you met with some of the leaders and leadership there. Tell us a little bit about what you learned on that trip, and what's your position on Israel?
Well, I think, again, I've been very supportive. There's been a lot of resolutions and things that we voted on in terms of the House. I think I've got a 100% record with them. But again, they're the only democracy, the only stability that we really have in the Middle East. They've been a great friend. We work closely together on a lot of different issues. So I think we're willing to do, within reason, anything we can to make sure that Israel continues to stay strong long term. That's been my position from day one, and I think that they, work very closely with our government. So I think, again, it's been a great partnership.
Well, and as you mentioned, Iran continues to build and nurture their nuclear program as well, which is a serious threat not only to the region but to the world. And Israel has spoken up. They're drawing a line in the sand. You said this will not happen. So hopefully, through diplomacy and through sanctions from the United States and the world, they can. Iran might have a moment to pause to rethink their course of action.
That's been the biggest issue when you talk to Israel, and you mentioned going to visit with them. I was there 6 years ago. But when you talk to anybody, any of the leadership there, that's by far. They got a lot of issues in terms that they want our help and support on, but the biggest issue that they have is not making sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear device. And I think that's obviously clearly been our position as well. And everybody's concerned about it in the region, not just Israel.
Now, Congressman, you've been very, very vocal in your opposition to foreign aid to Egypt. And right now Egypt is in all sorts of turmoil, in 2 trials going on. Can you give us a kind of an overview of how you feel the situation in Egypt is evolving, and generally on your position on foreign aid in general?
Well, just in foreign aid in general, I think it's $50 billion a year. We need to look at that. It needs to be cut substantially, I think, when we got all of our debt and deficits that we're dealing with. We can't afford to be buying our friends around the world. When you look in terms of Egypt, we've been giving them on average about $2 billion a year for the last 30 years, $60 billion. We're not in a position to do that anymore. And again, I've been in Cairo. They haven't been supportive. I feel like we're buying their friendship. I think there was a poll that was done by Gallup in Egypt. 80% of the people or better didn't even want the money. So why are we giving them the money? They haven't been a good friend. They've come out negatively against Israel, and we're pumping in a couple of $2 billion in there a year. It makes absolutely no sense. So I think there's a lot of waste in foreign aid, but again, we need to be looking at what's in the best interest of America and Americans. I'd like to take a lot more of that money and use it here at home to pay down the debt or help our communities with flood insurance and other things that are important to the U.S.
Well, that kind of segues into the next question, is what impact does the debt and the deficit have on our national security and our ability for the national defense?
Yeah, I think one of our admirals had mentioned, Mullins, said that their biggest threat that we have to our national security is a national debt. You can't continue to run up this debt, $17 trillion, going to $20 trillion. At some point, someone doesn't buy your bonds or your T-bills, and you have an event a lot worse than October of 2008. And these events, don't just all of a sudden roll out in 5 months. It might happen overnight. They can melt down because we're all interconnected. Exactly. And that's why I think we've got to bend the curve and start changing in terms of the way we do business and live more within our means. If taxpayers sent us, like this year, a record amount of money, $2.7 trillion, we should try to give the best value for the money. That's the way every other organization in the counties I represent and families work. You can't continue to spend 30% more than you take in every year without it ending badly at some point. And that's my biggest issue and the thing I continue to fight for. I want a constitutional balanced budget amendment. It simply says if the taxpayers send us $3 trillion, we give them the best value for the money, and that's it.
Well, one thing that you have the very consistent message throughout all of your conversations. So, and I think that's one of the things that that kind of shapes you, is that this message is the same thing: be frugal, be forthright in your dealings, and that's an excellent attribute to have, Congressman, is that you're consistent in your message.
Well, I'd say it's, my biggest issue is debt and deficit spending. I like to say is stay within our means, because, I have sons, everybody has children and grandchildren. I care about what we leave the next generation. But the other part of that is just as important. We got to grow our economy. We got to do everything we can to create good paying jobs. And that means to me we've got to help our small business community be more successful. We have one of the most successful chambers in terms of Manatee Chamber in the state, in the country. It was Chamber of the Year for the U.S., in fact, and I think there's won it 4 times in Florida. And they're doing everything they can do to help our small businesses be more successful, create more jobs. So it's really deficit spending and job creation. And there's, and my sense is that that's moving in the right direction right now in terms of small businesses seem to be doing a little bit better. When I look around the community, I'm excited about the mall. I'm excited about the port. There's a lot of activity going on. Construction, home building. So I feel good we're going to get a good 5 or 10 year run. I'm very bullish looking forward.
Now, I want to touch base on a couple of other things, if I may, and this goes back to the deficit and the government shutdown. But you supported specific legislation to ensure the military would get paid during the shutdown. And that's a critical thing, because that's a huge expense for the government. Why was that important to you?
Well, we have, like, the Capitol Hill Police. There's 2,000 men and women sworn there. They weren't getting paid. It's crazy. Now, historically, they've always got paid, but just that uncertainty. A lot of people live, as I did when I grew up as a kid, you lived that paycheck on Friday. You've got to have it.
Exactly.
And that's the way a lot of people in America live. That's the way I grew up. And to not be able for them to pay their bills, or the thought of not being able to pay their bills, or where they might get the money to pay the house payment, is just wrong. I mean, we need to figure out a way on a bipartisan basis to get that addressed before it becomes a shutdown. And looking forward, we've got these things that might come up again in terms of a shutdown. I'm hopeful, and I'd like to think on a bipartisan basis we'll prevent that, so that members of the military or the Capitol Hill Police, get taken care of first, I think, before everybody else.
And I think your emphasis on bipartisan agreements, bipartisan talks, that's a critical part of the equation.
Well, I feel very excited. I co-chair the chairman for the state delegation. We have 29 members, and it's amazing how we can sit down and agree on so many things. We had a thing on ports and trade, and we got a lot of agreement on things we could do there. Tourism. We're going to be talking about flood insurance. There's a lot of things we agree on. When it gets up to Washington with the leadership and others, it always seems to break down. But we've got to find a way. We're all Americans. The world's changed in the last 20 years. I did a lot of business in the 70s and 80s. America, we were the market ourselves in Europe. Now China and India are real factors. So we've got to raise our game, do what's best for our companies and our jobs here in the States. And again, that's primarily my focus.
Well, you're the only Florida member in the House Ways and Means Committee, and as a member of the Subcommittee on Trade as well. And you helped pass the free trade agreement with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea, which is a terrific feat. What are the benefits going to be here locally in this region?
One word: jobs. We've got 20,000 good paying jobs directly and indirectly with the port. I think we can double it. We're the closest port to the Panama Canal. I chair that caucus. It's about getting good paying jobs, better paying jobs into Manatee County. We have 14 ports across the state, maybe 15 with kind of an inland port, or so to speak, but the numbers are $90 billion in economic activity. So Florida is a big opportunity in terms of port and trade, and I'm going to do everything to push forward in terms of that. And I just want to comment one other thing. I'm on the subcommittee trade, but the other thing, the Ways and Means that committee does, the only member of Congress on Ways and Means, Democrat or Republican, we also oversee Medicare and Social Security, which are great programs. We've got to make sure, it gets back to deficit spending, that we make sure that they're viable long-term, not just for current seniors, but for their children and grandchildren. So when you look at Ways and Means, it oversees Social Security, Medicare, trade, and taxes. It's got big jurisdictions, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that things that are important to our veterans and to our seniors, Social Security, Medicare, they're viable long term.
And which is an important fact, being the only Florida member, is that, the best interests of Florida for you, I would think, are always like one of the first things that you think about.
Well, yeah, it's, I know that in our area here, when I think about Florida, we have 700,000 people. I had 5 counties. Now I've got 2, Sarasota, Manatee counties, so I can focus more on those 2 counties. But of that 700,000 people that each member represents, I have 200,000 65 and older, 300,000 55 and older. So I work for the seniors. When it comes to veterans, Social Security, and Medicare, those are great programs. We've made those commitments. I'm going to make sure we keep those commitments long term.
Now, recently, you've also visited China, but what's your position on trade with China and China's currency? I mean, China is famous for manipulating their currency. Tell us your thoughts on that and what we should be doing to kind of monitor China's behavior.
Well, China, to me, is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. That's a game changer. I mean, if you look at Japan was successful in the 80s. China, I was in the late 80s in China. They were a non-factor, a non-entity from an economic standpoint. They're an economic superpower. I met with their Minister of Trade and Finance Minister. They both told me in separate meetings the same thing. They want to create 20 million new jobs a year. So we're going to be battling them for the jobs. So I just think that I don't like what's happened with our trade deficits. I mean, they were really killing us from that standpoint. They've always said, well, we're a third world nation, and we need to give them the benefit of the doubt. At the end of the day, we need to fight for our companies, keep our jobs here, and make sure we're doing everything to keep our businesses competitive.
But as a trade partner with China, I mean, it's a tremendous powerhouse. Businesses, look to China, to import everything. Do you see, more of a balance in trade happening with China? Yeah,
we need to get more of a balance in trade. The way to do that is we need to have an administration and Congress that helps our businesses be more successful. We've got to do everything we can for companies here locally and companies across America for them to be more successful so they can compete. We got great leadership and we've got great people in America, but when you look at, for example, I'm on the committee for the tax code. Our taxes are at 40%. Average tax in America for small business is up as high as 50% when you take in federal and state tax. In China and Hong Kong, or let's say Hong Kong, it was 20%, now it's 16%. So when you're doing business abroad, you're handicapping our people. We need to make sure we're competitive at every aspect and do everything we can to help them be more successful. And the tax code is one area where we need work.
What other issues do you think that you would suggest that to help the United States remain competitive in global trade?
Well, I think one of the things we just were talking about in terms of taxes, we have to find a way. Our tax code, I think, is 67,000 pages or something. That's absurd. We need to have a flatter, fair, more competitive taxes that we help our businesses, small and large, to be more successful long term. And then again, we have to get out and compete for the business. The world's changed with technology and everything that's going on in the world. We've got to, I get back to whether it's the state government or the federal government, we should be in the business of helping our people not just do business in Florida and Alabama or Mississippi, but across the country and across the world. It's a global marketplace, and I think someone said 95% of the marketplace is outside the U.S., and that needs to be the focus.
So, Congressman, as you go back into session, what is those key things that you're going to be looking at and working on for your community, for your constituents?
The big thing, we're going to talk about flood insurance, the most immediate thing. We're going to try to see if we can't get that addressed, where we buy some time, a year and a half, so we can get something that makes sense instead of flood insurance going up 4 or 5%. We're going to continue to work on prescription drugs that impact this community in Florida. And then obviously some of the things that we talked about, I'm going to pursue aggressively the whole thing on debt and deficit, get a balanced budget amendment, fight to do everything we can to have more favorable laws for small businesses so they can create the jobs and we have a more competitive environment here and across the country. So there's a lot of issues. There's probably 50 things that we work on, some more than others, but because of the committee that I'm on, my focus, in the very near future is a simplified tax code. I'm going to make sure that we do everything we can with Medicare and Social Security. They're viable long term. These are things that people have paid into. And then obviously in trade, in terms of the port here in Manatee, we're going to do everything we can to expand our trade exports outside of the U.S.
Congressman, in just a few days, the country will be celebrating Veterans Day. And you've always been a great supporter of veterans. And what would you like the veterans in this community, Sarasota, Manatee County, to know about your efforts on their behalf?
Well, again, without our veterans, we wouldn't have our freedom. Someone said that freedom is not free. It's because of our veterans that we have the greatest nation on earth. And I'm going to be very active and engaged. We have an event in Sarasota. I can't be at both. I try to do one year Manatee and 1 year Sarasota. Last year I was in Manatee. So my wife's actually going to be in Manatee. I'll be in Sarasota. Then we'll probably switch next year. But the other thing is that we have 90,000 veterans in the area. I'm very excited. I went by the National Veterans Cemetery the other day. We're building not only a world-class cemetery that's there and done for the most part, but we're also building, we had a gift in the community for $10 million from the Patterson Foundation. They're building that pavilion. It's on its way. It's under construction. We will have the nicest facility for our veterans anywhere in the country. And I'm very excited about that because they've more than earned it.
And Congressman, the veterans in this community have always, been very supportive on you and your behalf. And, the things that you've done for them have been most appreciated. Congressman, I think we're almost out of time here, and I do want to thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule. I think it's really important for this community to know from their congressman what are the issues at hand, what are the challenges that you face, and the things that you want to emphasize and work on for your constituents and for this community. We want to thank you very much, and we welcome you back at any time as these issues come addressed and you want to talk a little bit more about them. We'll welcome you back.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I'd just like to share with all your viewers that, if they can go on buchanan.house.gov and get on our email list, it lets them give an opportunity to tell us what's on their mind. They'll get an opportunity to weigh on the important issues of the day. I do look at that. Our staff looks at that. And again, as I mentioned early part of the show, I'm humbled to be a congressman as a kid that grew up in a blue-collar family. But at the end of the day, I'm a representative, and my goal is to represent the people here the best I can.
Congressman, I can't thank you enough for joining us, and thank you for joining us on this very special edition of Up Close on METV.
Thanks, Charles.